Hey there, grace and peace to you. Jesus is risen. I am Captain Roger McCord of the Salvation Army's Hanford Corps and Community Center here in beautiful Hanford, California. And this is the Shield Online, our weekly online version of our Sunday message. We like to take a few minutes each week in our services to examine stories from the Bible to see if there is any value in knowing what was said or in trying to duplicate some of the practices there into the modern world here. Do the teachings of Jesus still resonate and encourage us, or should we lay them aside? Today's story is the single most important tale of the Christian faith movement. It defines, or should, everything else that has happened since, and a lot of what went on before. I am speaking, of course, of the resurrection of Jesus. Does it matter? Or is it just a nice story for us to tell each other every year while we gorge ourselves on jelly beans and Reese's peanut butter eggs? And for that matter, what exactly is this story? We spend so much time talking about giant rainbow egg-laying bunnies and the inconvenience of there being so many church activities getting in the way of a perfectly good holiday weekend that most people don't really know what it was that happened on that day all those years ago. They might know a few facts about it, but not enough to piece together the whole history, which actually gives us the perfect place to start. One morning, as the cheerful first rays of daylight began to shine over the eastern hills, a group of women hurried towards Jerusalem from Bethany. It was a 2-mile trek, and they were weighed down with bundles and bags, which slowed their climb over the Mount of Olives a bit, but not much. And while this journey was one that they usually did with much talking and laughter and singing, today they moved in near silence. It was early, and their reason for this trip was not a happy one. They were going to bury a friend. That was a somber task at the best of times, and this was not the best of times. Preparing a body was usually done within hours of death, but in this case, the deceased had been dead for 3 days. His body had been in poor shape then, and rough treatment followed by 3 days in a tomb in the hot desert region they called home would not have helped. They knew they were going to serve a grim duty. Not that it was all bad. They knew that 2 men had begun preparations on the first day just after their friend's, the women had been there when he died. They'd been staying as close as they had dared. You see, their friend had been executed, and people were not allowed to stand too close to the roadside crucifixes near the city's main gate. The Romans who ruled here wanted criminals punished in the most horrifying and visible way possible. Bystanders might block the view of the condemned hanging naked while they bled and gasped and died, or they might be someone who, with a sharp knife or a pointed stick or something might hasten the death of a friend, sparing them from the long agonizing torture that the executioners believed was appropriate. So no one was allowed to stand too close. The women had waited along the roadside near enough to see, but far enough away that the soldiers overseeing the 3 executions being done that day wouldn't bother with them. They had heard the last audible cry from the man that they had thought was bringing a new kind of hope into the world. A surprisingly loud, "It is finished," and then he hung unmoving without saying anything more. Later, one of the soldiers brought a spear over and slid it carefully into the side of their friend, causing a gout of blood to rush out. They had seen other executions. Rome seemed to delight in this macabre display, and they knew that no one who went up on a cross was ever let down before everyone was completely certain that they were well and truly dead. Now, the women had planned to claim the body as soon as it was taken down, but there had been a commotion as 2 members of the Sanhedrin appeared and collected his remains before that happened. That Sanhedrin was the Jewish ruling council. These men pulled the body off the cross, and they laid it in a small cart bed, and then had taken it a short distance around the city wall to an area where the wealthy had tombs cut into the hillside. Now, the women, they didn't have enough status to interrupt or offer help to such important men, so they kept their distance and they observed as best they could. And the men rushed through washing and wrapping the body, pouring out too much anointing oil and not using quite enough of the strong-smelling spices that would keep the odor of death down while the flesh decayed. And the men handled their friend with reverence. The women could tell that. But they were in a hurry to be done before the sun set and the Passover celebration would begin. See, Passover was a high holy day for all Israelites. It was a day on which work was forbidden. And that day began the instant the sun's last crescent disappeared over the western horizon. So the men rushed, and the women fretted over what was done that wasn't maybe enough in their eyes. A heavy stone was rolled over to cover the entrance to the tomb, and the men hurried away while the women planned how they could correct what they thought needed to be corrected. Then they too hurried on their way because everyone needed to be home before nightfall. That's when Passover began. And I got to tell you, it was a long night. The Passover meal they shared that evening was a joyless event that year. Those who had gathered in Bethany at the home of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, they were all friends of Jesus, the man whose death and entombing the women had witnessed. They were all disciples, followers of Jesus, many of whom had been with him when the soldiers and temple guards had appeared and taken him from their midst. They scattered and they made their way back here to this place that they'd been staying, and there hadn't seemed to be any pursuit. Where the women then felt that they could safely go out and see what became of their teacher, the men felt they needed to stay out of sight, afraid that soldiers might decide to grab them too. And what would usually have been a festive occasion in the Passover was instead performed fitfully as they grieved. Now the next morning was still Passover. See, Jewish days began at sunset, not sunrise like ours. And travel was not allowed on high holy days. Usually, they would have been spending the day celebrating, but not this time. This time, they simply waited for their opportunity well, they had no idea. Flee, I guess. To head back to the lives that they'd lived before Jesus had appeared and changed everything. And that hope that they had held on to had been so sweet. But now the memory of what they expected was bitter beyond bearing. And to make matters worse, this year, the Passover fell on the 6th day of the week, which meant when it ended at sunset on the 15th of Nisan, the weekly Sabbath began. And like on the holiday, travel was forbidden on the Sabbath, so they continued to sit and brood and grieve and wallow in their fear. Well, the men did, anyway. The women had something they needed to do first. As much as they could without violating the rules of God's rest, they gathered materials to do a proper burial for their friend. And after sunset on the Sabbath, when the next day, the first day of the week, had officially begun, they busied themselves mixing and jarring up the aloes they could. They put wraps and brushes and cleaning rags together in bags. Jars of water for washing and cleaning were sealed and set aside. And when morning's light began to appear in the sky, they went to knock on the door of a supplier of spices to purchase the last things they needed before they hurried towards the tomb. This was a little thing, but it was something they could do. It was about 2 miles to reach the city from their village, less than an hour of travel time usually. There were very few travelers on the road at this hour, and no one spoke to them as they hurried on their way. As they neared the city, one of them, maybe Mary Magdalene, maybe Mary, who was the mother of James, maybe one of the others with them, she wondered out loud if there would be anyone who could move the heavy stone away, or if the group of them would be able to do it on their own. No one answered, though, because just then there was a loud rumbling, and the ground shook as if a lightning bolt had struck nearby. Hurrying on, they entered the graveyard, and they saw, to their surprise, that the stone which should have been blocking their access to the tomb was rolled out of the way, leaving the entrance open. And a man sat on top of that stone, but the light caught him in such a way that made him both the center of their attention and hard to see at the same time. It was as if he was somehow shining. He was wearing all white, clothes as white as snow, in fact, which added to the glare and made him seem somehow larger than he was. With a start, they realized that there were guards, 4 of them, lying to either side of the opening, apparently asleep. And this frightened them as much as the strange man and the open doorway. But before panic set in, the man spoke to them. "Don't be scared," he said, with a voice both commanding and soothing. "You are looking for Jesus, who was crucified, but he isn't here. He is risen, just as he said." And the man gestured towards the entrance of the tomb. "Look, here's where his body was." And they could see the niche where their friend's body had been laid out, but there was no one there. "Now," said the man from his perch atop the stone, "stop looking for the living among the dead. Go quickly and tell the other disciples that he has risen from the dead and will go ahead of you to Galilee. You'll see him there just as he told you he would." What else was there to say? Each of them took a long, last look inside the tomb, then at the fallen guards and the beaming young man who still seemed to be glowing in the early morning sun, and they rushed as quickly as they could away from that place, heading back towards Bethany. I don't think any of them was sure what they should be thinking or feeling about this. They made surprisingly good time. Back at the house, everyone was up by now. Many were packing, preparing to head to their own homes. With Jesus gone, they had no reason to stay away unless it turned out that the authorities were looking for them. And if that was the case, they wanted to be away from the home of their friends quickly before trouble followed them here. The cluster of women suddenly bustling into the midst of these preparations, all talking at once, telling some story about the tomb being empty, was alarming, frankly, because not long ago Caesar had made a decree for all the lands under Roman control that any defilement or disturbance of a dead body was a capital crime punished by death. It was not just abhorrent in most of the cultures under the empire's umbrella, it was a practice the emperor wanted to stamp out of existence. Tampering with a grave was not something anyone would do lightly, and it wasn't anything anyone would want to be accused of doing. Roman justice was known to be swift, and it was also known to see penalties enacted on convenient non-citizens rather than waiting for a trial to sort out the innocent from the guilty. If Jesus' body was gone, who do you think the blame would fall on? Well, as the women's stories got sorted out, with them reporting about the guards and the man in white on the stone, who they all seemed to describe differently, the men got more and more concerned about what might have happened. Then, when the message that Jesus wasn't there because he had risen was passed on, they were completely flummoxed because that was crazy talk. Wasn't it? As men might do at times, they thought that this might just be typical of this group of women. They got so scrambled up, they were just talking a bunch of nonsense. It was obviously some kind of a ridiculous joke being played on them. Dead people don't get up and walk out of a tomb. And Peter looked at Lazarus, and Lazarus looked back at Peter as they pondered how such a thing could possibly be. How could people be so cruel as to perpetuate this kind of joke? And they thought about this for a moment, trying to understand what was or wasn't possible. And then Lazarus looked at Peter, and Peter looked back at Lazarus, thinking, wait, what if? And the two of them were up on their feet and out the door in a flash, running as fast as they could go, heading for the tomb. Lazarus ran faster, dodging people on their way in and out of the city in the early morning light on his way, and he reached the tomb first, but held up at the entrance. He wasn't quite able to bring himself to go in. Leaning over to look inside, he could see the niche that Jesus would have been laid in, holding nothing but strips of linen heaped on a slab. Now, Peter, Breathing heavily, he raced up behind him, barely slowed down as he ducked into the dark mouth of the man-made cave. And he, too, saw the linens, and above them on the slab, separate, there was the headcloth that had been tied over Jesus' face. And he stood unmoving, trying to comprehend what would possibly possess a grave robber to unwrap a body. I mean, it wouldn't make it easier to carry or any less obvious. And Lazarus overcame his uncertainty about walking into a tomb, and he stepped in beside Peter, and he took in the empty slab and the empty linen wrap twisted all around nothing and the abandoned headscarf. And he knew. He didn't get it, not really, not yet, but he knew. Every fiber of him felt the truth of it. It bubbled up in him like fresh water in a spring. The words came to his lips unbidden, as if they needed to be said, needed to be heard. Jesus is alive. And Peter looked at him, wide eyes filled with wonder as he considered the disciple that we are told that Jesus loved, the one who had been called from his own grave not so long ago. He was confused and excited and afraid and unable to bring himself to speak at all. He just nodded. And they made their way out and walked back down without another word. Mary had tried to follow them when they bolted out of the house, but had quickly fallen behind. It was her third time making the journey between the two locations, and it's hard to run in skirts. And by the time she reached the tomb again, Peter and Lazarus were already gone. She may have missed them in the crowd or by taking a different path from the road to the tombs, or she may just not have seen them because her tears were still flowing as a result of this mix of grief and emotion seesawing through her all morning and all 3 days before. She was unsure what she had seen and didn't know if she should believe what she had heard, and the house full of men telling her she was wrong or crazy or just overcome with grief had not helped, even if the other women all agreed with her. I mean, she was sure she knew what she had seen and heard, but what if she had somehow mixed things up like they thought? Standing at the mouth of the tomb, she bent over to look inside and saw two men dressed in white, sitting on the slab which had held Jesus' body, one near where his head would have laid, and the other at the foot. "Woman, why are you crying?" one of them asked. And angry and sad and trying to regain her composure, trying to stubbornly hold on to her sense of reality and decorum, while these visitors sat casually in the place where her teacher's body should be and asked her stupid questions, she managed to stammer out, they have taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they moved him." Then, aware that she didn't know them, she didn't know who she was speaking to, she turned to leave and found another man standing behind her. She could barely make out his form through her tears and her frustration, and he was in her way, and he was saying something to her. What was it? "Why are you crying?" he was asking. "Who is it you're looking for?" It must be one of the groundskeepers, she thought. Those men who tended the graves and kept everything in order here. Wait, maybe he would know what happened to the body. "Sir," she burst out, "if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him. I will go get him." Not exactly the coherent plea for help she had intended, but it turned out it didn't matter, because as she was wiping her tears, trying to clear her vision, he answered her with a voice laced with deep compassion, and he said only one word, but that word meant everything to her when he spoke it. "Mary." That voice. Was it? How could it be? But then she could see as she blinked away the last of the tears from view, and it was him. Jesus. Jesus? Jesus. And in a flash, her arms were around him, fresh tears from her eyes being pressed into the chest of his robe, and he was laughing, and she was holding on as if somehow that could make this moment last forever. "You have to let me go," he told her. "I have things to do, and you need to go to the others. Tell them I am ascending to our Father, our God. Go to Galilee. You will all see me there." And that's what she did. In awe and confusion and uncertainty and absolute knowledge that Jesus was alive, she went back to the others and told them, "I have seen the Lord." Now, they didn't all get it. We know some of them doubted, but they finished packing up and they went. They joined the stream of people leaving the city after Passover, heading north towards Galilee. Mary and the 11 and Lazarus and the other disciples, they had a new hope for the coming days. As they went, they shared their story with others, along with the message I want to bring to you today. Jesus is alive. Jesus is alive. Death has been defeated. The Prince of Peace has begun to reign. Jesus is alive. Hey, whoever you are, wherever you have put yourself in this world, whatever circumstances have led you to being in whatever location or situation you are in, know this: Jesus is alive. You have nothing to fear. God is with you. There is nowhere you can go that God is not already present. Just turn and go with God. Grace and peace to each and every one of you in the coming week, in the coming year, and throughout the rest of your life. Amen.